You are listening to the Marc Guzman podcast experience. So welcome to another episode of Ask Marc Anything. Thank you for the people that have submitted questions. I plan to answer them here. So let's get right into the first question.
All right, our first question is from former guest and friend of the show, Michelle Keaton. Can you talk about buying land and property by itself and why there is such a huge difference in the process for that and buying a home?
Okay, so there's a few things to consider when you're going to buy a piece of land. Number one is that most land, it's going to be under, if you buy a piece of land, it's going to be under $100,000 most of the time. Now, for many bank lenders, any loan under $100,000 is really not worth it to them when you start doing the math of the amount of work it takes to generate a loan, to get it brokered out, to then sell it, and then what kind of profits and return you're going to get on a $50,000 loan, $80,000 loan. It just doesn't make sense. One of the biggest problems when the recession hit and you had homes in Richmond selling for $60,000, $70,000 is that you couldn't get financing for these homes that were really cheap. And so many of the buyers had to come in and buy them cash because it just didn't make sense to even lend on single family homes just because it's not profitable to them. So part of it is below a certain dollar amount, banks just don't want to deal with it. It's just not worth it to them. So you will have to go to a very specific lender for that. It might be a hard money loan and you refinance in some kind of package deal, or you have to go to a land specific lender. Now, the other thing that you have to consider with land is that what's the specific use and purpose of the land? Because most land that you buy is not going to provide you some kind of revenue, and it's also not going to provide you some kind of practical use in some cases. If you're buying a land, what's it zoned for? Is it zoned for commercial, residential? Some cities that may classify residential R1, may have R2, R3, R4, and various different classifications. Each classification will determine what that property is zoned for. If the city doesn't have that, the county for sure will have that. So there's a lot of factors that go into it. If you're buying a piece of land because you want to build a house on it, but it's zoned for horse property and you can only build a house if it's a minimum of half an acre, but it's a quarter acre lot, now you can't build on it. So what's the whole purpose of buying the land? This is all stuff that a lender is going to look at. And for most residential banks, or for most banks that deal in the residential market, it's just not worth it for them to jump into the land business unless that's what they specialize in. And so that's really the reason why you have too much work and then you have just not enough profit on the other end. So that's why you have to find a land-specific lender.
All right, and then what is your take on the proposal to allow BART to develop homes on its own land?
This is very interesting because we were just talking to Eric Myers on Highest and Best this week about a specific situation in Berkeley where a journalist was talking and criticizing the people of Berkeley, and she lives in Berkeley too, where there's a BART station and there's a big parking lot there that can be used to build up and build condominiums, apartments, whatever the case is, to allow more housing. And there's been multiple times of people trying to get this approved and built, but you have people in the neighborhood basically not in my backyard, and they don't want these additional units built because of traffic, because more people, because they want their parking, etc. And so it was very interesting chat. Go check out that podcast with Eric Myers. And so we probably maybe an hour or two right after the podcast, we discovered this article, and BART is in the process of looking for approval to allow housing to be built on their land. I personally think it's great. Anything that we can do to build more housing units, whether they're apartments or condominiums you can buy, I think it's a big plus. Uh, in California, we have a huge shortage of inventory for housing. So anything that we can do to keep that number moving up, I think is very crucial. So I think it's a very good move on BART. I think it's smart. I think it should pass. Hopefully it does pass, and we can get more housing units built.
So this is according to the San Francisco Business Times. The quote they have is Alameda County is opposed to it because they worry about their authority over local land use decisions and determinations. And other suburban East Bay cities, Fremont, Hayward, Lafayette, Pleasant Hill, are worrying about too much urbanization. So those are the arguments that are against what is being called AB 2923.
Okay. And see, this is one thing that if you're going to argue against urbanization and too much housing being built, then don't complain when housing prices are really high. There's a huge demand to live in the Bay Area, and people need a place to live. Hands down, that's what it comes down to. So if you're okay with prices going up, then yeah, you go ahead and argue against urbanization. But if you complain about high rental prices, high sales prices to buy a home, a condo, whatever the case is, then you should be arguing in favor of building more housing units because that will lower the cost. Simple supply and demand.
Well, that means I can't have my cake and eat it too.
Correct.
All right, and then lastly, when a property manager or realtor tells you that the neighborhood is a good or safe neighborhood, what can I do to verify that?
Okay, number one, for every property manager and realtor out there, you should not be answering the question when people ask you, is this a good, bad, or safe neighborhood? That's very subjective. You could be in a place where, you might consider it a bad neighborhood, but for the people that live there, they consider it a good and safe neighborhood. And now you just get yourself into a legal problem by misrepresenting the neighborhood. So that's very subjective, so you never want to answer that question. Now, for the people that are looking to move into a neighborhood, again, you need to determine for you what you deem a good, bad, or safe neighborhood. But there's plenty of statistics out there that you can look. Go to a website called google.com. There you can search up anything under the sun. Search up crime statistics, look up city stats. Most cities will have the fire department, police department, various services listed there that you can contact them directly. Some advanced cities will have even the stats directly on there. You can go to Zillow, look up public transportation close by, look up the walk score, look up, there's a website and I can't think of the name of it, but you can even type in an address and it'll tell you an approximate sound meter, basically how much sound is generated there by planes, by trains, by cars, by various different factors. You can find out all this information just by going to Google and doing a few, 10 minutes of research on several different websites. So if you want to find out if a neighborhood is good to your standards, number one, determine those standards, and number two, just do some research online. You should not be asking realtors and property managers, and especially people that are trying to sell the place. Those are usually the worst people to ask because they're always going to tell you good things, usually. But if you're a realtor, property manager, never answer that question. So,
all right, so
that's
pretty
it, right?
Google it then, is
Google
essentially.
it, exactly.
All right.
Yeah. Google is the best website to use ever, hands down. That's where you can learn a lot. Obviously, there's a lot of BS out there on the internet, but if you compile all this information, research it yourself, you'll get a good picture of what the neighborhood and city is like.